Yes, people, we are back again. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're listening around the world. 12th man's back. I've got a one-on-one. I'm your host as ever, Dan Potts, and I brought Micky P. Kerr back on. Micky, pleasure to have you back with us, my bro. How you doing?
It's a pleasure to be back, mate, and thanks for having me. And I'm well, as we said earlier, looking dishevelled as ever, and we're like opposite ends of the spectrum, mate. You're looking sharp. I'm looking like this. It's the yin and the yang, but it's what makes the world go around, isn't it? And it's what makes football fandom so unique. We're all different people under the same umbrella, mate. And I'm hoping that I can get that concept across to the Gooners fans listening.
Yeah, 100%, man. Look, the reason that you're saying you're looking like that must be because you're working harder than me, mate. And trust me, people, Micky is literally everywhere at the moment. Every single time I turn on YouTube, he's with one of the boys talking about this. And it's a great, great thing that we're going to be discussing today. For those that didn't know or that haven't spoken to myself and Micky before, we're going to be talking about something which is massively important in terms of ownership of football clubs today. Now, I'm actually halfway through this book, and I didn't realize how slow I read. However, I have been enjoying it, and before I steal your thunder, mate, I just want to allow the viewers to have a bit of an understanding of why you're here back with us again today, Mick. So over to you, mate.
Yeah, I've written a book that is a fight back, basically, about what's happening to our culture and our game, our national sport, and we all know that it's not what it was. Interestingly, really, I mean, I know this is a tangent, and this. The whole thing is an ADHD stream of consciousness here, mate. So, but yeah, that's the book, Football the People's Shame, How to Revolutionise the National Sport. But we all know that a lot's changed, and that book explains it. It explains what's happened to the game, how the English football came to be basically like a business before a sport, which is what football is now. And that is very much to our detriment as football fans, as for those of us who have a spiritual connection to football and football clubs, and that's very much to our detriment. And then it explains something that no one's ever done, a solution. Because my point and why I think this book is important is it looks at the bigger picture, Dan. Nobody is doing that. Nobody is looking at, right, where's this ship sailing? Because we've taken our eye off the ball here, and it's about time we look at the bigger picture, see things in the bigger context, and once you start doing that, you begin to build a different picture, and you can work out what's gone wrong and what we can do to reverse it. Because there's a huge opportunity for the country and for us as football fans if we can. The themes of the book can come into being, then everything changes, and we'll chat about it. If we haven't actually discussed what we're going to chat about, Dan, we've just kept it loose and we've just been WhatsApping and stuff. But I'd like to talk about monopolization. I'd like to talk about where the timeline is headed. It's difficult to work out where we are on the timeline, but nobody's asking, where's this timeline going? Everything that's happened, where's it going to end up? And I'd like to obviously talk about the idea of football fans reaching out across the club divide and beginning to stand up for ourselves, because no one's coming to save us, Dan. We've got to take responsibility, and we've got to save ourselves. We've got to save our culture, our heritage, and we've got to bring it into the 21st century as well. And big up to you, Ryan. Everyone listening, let's
we've got Geordie Team for Life who's sitting on Just Joe's channel. Just Joe's a big fan of us, and we're a big fan of him, obviously, as a Leeds fan. And 12th Man has everyone on here, not just Arsenal fans, but there's a lot of Arsenal fans that will be listening to this and probably very much be agreeing where I'm on in terms of the ownership at Arsenal Football Club, which is, in the last 21 years, it's taken to win a Premier League title. Who's been the owners of Arsenal? Well, it's been the Cronkies for the majority of it, and I'm still waiting. So, and a lot of other stuff is going on, mate. We've got brilliant stadiums, and we've got a dog now called Win, and we've got a lot of PR, and we've got more merch coming out than ever before. So they're loving it, man, and they're lapping it up, but I'm not seeing any reward from it, mate. So my season ticket is going up every single year, and we're not winning anything. So look, I'll let you steer the conversation, because I don't want to take you down a kind of avenue that you don't want to go down. And I know that you've got some stuff coming up and really kind of trying to get the message out to why it is important that people listen to this. And we've got people in the chat that are listening and have probably seen you and heard you before, but I'll let you go with where you want to steer the conversation, mate.
Well, we'll start with where you just steered it, because, you know, people at Arsenal are happy. The more people I speak to on this great podcast network, you know, what you've created here, what Joe just mentioned, created, Just Joe, you've got a real loyal followers and fan base, and a nice collection of people. And this is how I'm going to spread the idea. We're going to go speak to fans, because no one's happy. There's a lot of things got Spurs going at the minute. They're really unhappy at Spurs. You know, they want Levy out. Nothing's changing. And you see, even at Arsenal, you think you're one of the benefactors of this system in terms of where the money's going. You're the richest club, so are Spurs. But it's not doing us any good. All this wealth and this money and this commercialization, it's not benefiting us. It's benefiting the owners of the business. And this is what football is now. It's a business before a sport. And there's different ways that we can do this, because what very briefly, I think you'll know about this, Dan. You've read a bit of the book, and the first bit of the book describes what's happened. But very briefly, I'm just going to go through what the Victorians created and why football is so special. They made football a sport first and a business second.
Yep.
The business element to football was really strictly controlled and regulated. They had Rule 34. The FA made that in 1892, which meant...
Yeah. Can I just cut in really quickly, Mick? Sorry, can I just cut in really quickly? Just to let people know, please be careful when you Google Rule 34. That's all I'm going to say.
Is it a porn thing now? Yeah.
I must have made a mistake of doing that.
All right. Be really careful, yeah. If you want to look at Rule 34, get the book, Football, the People's Shame. But it's on Audible as well. It's really hard to read a book. I didn't read it. You end up sounding like a robot. So they've got a great voice actor to do it. It's really good. But Rule 34 meant shareholders weren't allowed to pay themselves dividends. You couldn't take money out of a football club. It meant that football clubs were community assets, really. And they're businesses, but the control, that element is controlled. It protected football clubs from private profiteers who will, you know, use it for their own ends. Just Trudeau just he's having a bit of time to himself now, I imagine.
Yeah, he is.
You know, bit of me time now. Pause this. Get on Rule 34. But God knows that's what the internet's become, hasn't it? It's just a
unbelievable
big cats and porn. You know what I mean?
Honestly, make sure you put Rule 34 football. Make sure you football.
Please do. But that's what the Victorians did. It was really strictly regulated. Football is heavily regulated now, actually, but the regulations are all reactive. There's loads of loopholes. The problem we've got with football is it's rules-based, not ethics-based. What we've got to do is base rules around ethics and a moral code. And when you do that, you get a better outcome. What else did the Victorians do? They shared gate receipts. So the whole thing was designed so that smaller provincial towns wouldn't be dominated by larger urban centres who've got more populations. And it was the people then that funded the game, of course, before the globalisation of everything. They also had a wage cap. So you couldn't outspend everybody else. So football was very fair. You had loads of different teams winning. It was very regional, but it was about the collective. It was about the sport. It was about integrity, sporting competition, locality, community. And that's all changed now. The key decade is the 70s, with a switch away from Keynesianism over towards neoliberalism. Bit abstract, that. But, to put it, just to simplify it, the key year is 1983. You see that Thatcherite kind of ideology coming through, privatisation, deregulation. So what happened in 83 was it's the biggest year in football in terms of economics. It's gone well under the radar. Thatcher's second term in her office, in her prime minister reign. And what you get is massive deregulation. It's the first time that Rule 34 was abandoned. It's never been receded, Rule 34. It's just been bypassed. And a lot of Gooners will be pleased to hear it was Spurs. It was the Spurs that were the first to open the floodgates. It was Irving Scholar. He wrote to the FA in 83. He said, I want to bypass Rule 34. Why is 83 so significant? It's the first year you get broadcasting. So a change in technology, technological advancements affect football massively. And you had a duopoly of ITV and BBC. The pumping money into football. It's the first time you had weekly aired football, weekly live football. So there's money in the industry now. There's already money there, but it's growing. Rich people are seeing this and going, we want control. 83 is the first time they scrapped the sharing of gate receipts. So teams no longer shared resources, no longer shared money. You're seeing that individualism. You're seeing that kind of like, deregulation and pro-business and greed, really, individual greed coming through. And obviously you've got the bypassing of Rule 34 as well. That's it. It's 1983. It sets up the Premier League. Then you get this. Flood on the stock exchange. How he did Rule 34 was interesting. He just set up a holding company. So therefore the money doesn't leave Spurs. It just goes from the parent company into the holding company. But guess who owns the holding company? So that's they're taking money out the back door here. And that's still the model now. That's how they do it. Well, they probably even don't now. But they probably the whole thing's been forgotten about and just abandoned.
Yeah.
89 is big in football. Hillsborough, changes everything. You've got the Taylor report saying, right, we know all stadiums. The government said football clubs can fund this themselves. They can negotiate new broadcasting deals. In 1988, you've got a lot of money coming in from ITV, £48 million. So the money's going up and up. But then you get Sky TV, another technological advancement. And Murdoch has a monopoly. Now, how he got that monopoly is interesting. He threw his weight behind the Tories because Kinnock was the Labour MP, Labour leader. They were in opposition. He was set to win that general election of 1992. You've had a lot of. I think you'd had 1979, over a decade of Tories, and then that often happens. You get the next. You become unpopular, but they won that surprise election. Murdoch threw all his weight behind the Tories in the newspapers he's got, and the Tories gave him political protection because you're not allowed a monopoly. The Monopolies Commission. Kinnock was threatening to take him to the courts, so he was given the protection to set the Premier League up. That's how it happened. Very basics of how it happened. And then he threw 61 million into the Premier League. 30 years later, that's increased by 5,000%. It's more than that now, but over 3 billion. I think it's somewhere in 3.5 now. So there's so much money going up to the top league, but it's not shared evenly. The breakaway five that set the Premier League up with Murdoch were Arsenal, Liverpool, Everton, Man United, and Spurs. It's changed now, obviously. Everton aren't there anymore, and you've got the oil industry coming in with City and
Newcastle,
and with Chelsea as well. Yeah, and now obviously with Newcastle, you could probably call it a top 7 really in terms of financial kind of might. But and that's what's happened. I'm going to read some stats out to you now, Dan, that I've compiled. Or they're not in the book. The first one is, but this is new research, and what's interesting about this, mate, is that this has never been done before. And when you think about all the stats in football, it's crazy that what you're about to hear has never been done because nobody's looking at the bigger picture. It's a massive failure in journalism, this. No one's looking at where this ship is going. So when you work out mean averages over a 10-year period, you get to see patterns. You get to see, because some seasons will buck the trend. You'll get some seasons, it doesn't always work, the monopolization process. You get weird seasons, but I call it a 10-year mean average test. So what I want to do is split the decades up. You've got the Premier League comes in 92. Let's look at the first decade. You could win the league on 80 points. In the second decade, that's when it kicks in, this upward mobility of wealth and this concentration of wealth. It's when the monopolization, you really see it on the pitch. So in the second decade, it goes up to 87 points, quite a significant shift. In the third decade, it goes to 91. So in 3 decades, we've seen the winners, the average mean winners going up by 11 points. And if Leicester happened in that third decade, that's a glitch. That's not supposed to happen.
Yeah.
But what the monopolies do is they respond. Now, in this 7 seasons after Leicester, it goes up to 94. So is this the new normal? You need 94, 95 points now to be sure of a Premier League title. Yeah. I think this year is an interesting year because the monopolies have failed. Now, Arsenal, look at Arsenal, the case in point. You haven't got a striker. How have you ended up without a striker? That is not going to happen again. You are going to strengthen. You are going to sign strikers. The monopolies don't make mistakes for long. You've got so much financial power. You're going to outspend everybody. You're going to get, but so are Man City and so are Liverpool. You know, Man United are going to go big this year. They have to do because them and Spurs have failed massively. You can't all win it. But the point is this, out of these top 6, and you could probably bring Newcastle into the fold now, these top 7, you're going to see more and more wealth inequality because they just keep spending everyone else. And that the same is happening with the Premier League and the Championship. It's constantly going like that.
It is.
So, what's going to happen, I think now, I'd like to make some predictions. I think that we're going to see 2 teams in the 90s this season, in the Premier League. Two teams will get 90 plus, and it could even be 3. And what we're going to see is the bottom teams just getting trounced. I mean,
you look at it this season. Look at the 3 that have come up; they're going straight back down. And last season was the same.
Yeah, because the gap is too big. Now you're going from here, the Championship. You're trying to make that jump back, and you just can't. You can't. So, especially with the FFP rules that kind of like limit the spending, I think Ipswich have spent the most this season, but they're way off. And Delap is a great player. He's a really good find at that. To have him in the Championship and then to have him in the Premier League is a good acquisition for them. That he's not going to stay there. All the players go up. All the best players in the world, the best coaches are going into the same clubs, and over time, the inevitable will happen. I'll explain it in a bit. But I very quickly, I was going to talk about relegation, but the mean average of the top 4 is interesting. Starting in the 80s, because in 1981 they changed to 3 points for a win. So there used to be 2 points for a win. So what you see in the 80s is the mean average of the top 4 is 68. In the 90s, Premier League, it goes, it's 71. In the 90s, it goes to 68. So it drops. So the mean average of the top 4 there, it's pretty similar, but not. But in the second decade, so in the early 90s, that's when we see the shift. It goes up to 78. So, and then in the last decade, the previous decade, 2011 to 2020, it goes to 82. So what you've got here is the mean average of the top 4 has now overtaken the Premier League first decade winners. Wow. So that's an interesting dynamic. You can see how much the hoarding of wealth and talent to the top is affecting the league. Where have these points come from? They've come from the entire league, because the relegation story, the mean average of the relegated teams, it doesn't tell the same picture. It goes from 34 for 20 years, 80s and 90s. The mean average is 34. Now, when they say 40 points was the old cliche, you'll be safe on 40 points. You can see why, because the mean average is 34. But it drops to 31 in the early 90s, and the previous decade it drops to 30. So it's not a massive shift, that. But we are now 3 seasons in to the new decade, and the mean average has dropped to 26. So the relegated teams are starting to fall behind. The mean average this year at the moment is 19. The mean average points per game is 0.5. So you can see now that I think Leeds United will probably go up, but I think we'll be looking at somewhere around 25 points would be a decent season. I think 20 points would be probably a bad season. 30 points would be miraculous. That's where we are. Even Wolves, they've fallen so far behind, but there's no way you can catch up Wolves. They've got too many good players in the team compared to the Championship squads that are coming up, hybrid teams of Leicester. The hybrid, they're not quite Premier League, but they're too good for the Championship, because we're seeing this constant gap. So when they go back down to the Championship, what we're seeing now, we saw it last season, you can have 3 teams in the 90s. There will be someone is finishing 3rd on 94 points this year, I'm telling you. And I think we're going to see 100 mark, the 100-point mark breached as well in coming years, because the teams that come down have got massive wage bills. Leeds United this season have got the second biggest wage bill ever, and the most successful Championship manager ever. We should be going up. Last year, Leicester had the wage bill was astronomical compared to the rest of the league. It was like 60 million. I think we were 45 million closest. So it's huge difference. And you're going to see that again. Leicester, if Ipswich keep Kieran McKenna, they'll bounce straight back up. Leicester will have the commercial power to just outspend everybody in the Championship, go straight back up. Then they get to the Premier League, a waste of time. You're going straight back down because the gap between the best and the rest has grown so much. And I want to talk, Dan, about where this is headed because it's inevitable. It's all about economic philosophy. And as abstract as that is, you've got to understand this. Because it's like saying, I don't believe in gravity, so I'm going to jump off this building. It will affect it. It does affect it. The economic philosophy is Milton Friedman's economics. It's neoliberalism. It can only end up in one place. We are going towards a European Super League and then a World Super League. It is the only way it can happen. It's inevitable. And at the minute, I think that you got A22 with a company that came in and did this European Super League thing in 2021. Now, they threatened the UEFA power base here because they did it outside the remit of UEFA. And the 12 clubs got together and went, yeah, we can do this. You think about all that commercial power they've got. If you get the broadcasting set up and the league set up, the rest of the world will watch that league. All the commercial revenue goes in there. Every domestic league becomes a backwater league. But what they did was they went, oh, God, this is happening. So UEFA have gone, right, you do it with us or without us. So UEFA are now ceding advantage to the bigger clubs. They are going to the European Super League with UEFA. UEFA are going to facilitate it. If it's going to happen, it may as well happen with UEFA. That's what they're thinking. The Premier League are jostling for position 2. They're going to be involved in this as well. The Premier League body work for exactly the same people that our politicians work for. They work for US private equity and they work for the oil industry. That's who owns our football clubs. It's really important to understand. I mean, I was doing Sava's channel yesterday, the Spurs, and there was a chat after it. And I tuned into the end. And they were like, no, the European Super League can't happen because the English Premier League is too powerful. They need us more than we need them. And the point they're getting is this: the English Premier League isn't owned by the English. The English Premier League clubs are owned by the people that want the European Super League to happen. Stan Kroenke wants it to happen, And what's going to happen is they're going to take your club, bring it into a European Super League, and then they will change the name and they will change the location of that club. Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, this has already happened with Milton Keynes and with Wimbledon. And it's also happened in the NFL. Guess who facilitated that change? Stan Kroenke himself. He's done this before. So they are what this is naturally going to happen. These billionaires do not want, for example, Saudi Arabia do not want to be called Newcastle, and they won't be. They'll take this into a world club structure. And I'll tell you what is going to happen. The mirroring stock market strategies, the key ones to remember are mergers and acquisitions and vertical integration. That's how you get monopolies in the wider economy. Mergers and acquisitions, multi-club ownership models, they're already happening. But the biggest merger is going to be this. These 12 clubs, it's going to be more like 20. Do you know what? It could be 40 clubs by the time it's finished as a World Super League kind of structure. But they'll franchise it. You'll buy into it. Billionaires will put £10 billion on the table and just buy a club and make a club. But that's how it eventually works. They're going to merge with the broadcasters. They're going to merge with the commercial partners. And they're going to merge with the clubs themselves. It's a big, giant merger. So the broadcasting will be done as a single digital source, which is what we should be doing in the PL now. And they will all own it together. It'll be a one big, giant merger. The entire world will watch this. They will own the entire talent pipelines. They will then have to, other clubs lower in the domestic leagues, backwater leagues in comparison, will still need to exist because they need players to get, up to the European Super League. They need the standard. They need some kind of pyramid. But they will own our clubs. They will own all the clubs around it. They'll have to merge with them financially. Even if they're not owned by, like, let's say, Everton and Liverpool. Everton will need to merge with Liverpool because all the revenue will just go down. They'll have to they'll control the clubs. They'll finance the clubs so they can control the talent pipelines of the players, That's how this is going to end up. There's no other way it can work.
Robert in the chat has asked this as well, which is quite a nice segue for you, Mick, as well. It's probably relevant. Robert Segal, big up to you, Rob. I hope you're well, mate. He says, does Mickey believe the Premier League will play games overseas in Middle East and USA based on their ownerships? It's kind of what you're getting at, I suppose, in terms of what could be.
They floated the idea of a 39th game, you might remember. It was over in the States. Yeah, this happened. What I've just described to you is a big kind of seismic shock. It's like, wow, This happens incrementally. So it happens slowly. And the normalization of monopolization is happening up here. We've already normalized the same teams winning. So, I did some 10-year mean average test again. You look from 1900 to 1990. It's 8 decades that, if I got my maths right, because of the 2 wars. So you get the average different amount of teams winning, making the top 4 is 15. Let me explain that again. In a 10-year period, 15 different teams make the top 4. It never drops below 14 throughout each decade. It's really consistent. English football's got this rhythm to it that you see in these mean average tests that I do. And then in 1990s, it dropped to 13. So it goes under 14, but it's not a significant shift. It's that second decade again of the Premier League where we see the monopolisation process. It drops to 7. So just 7 different teams. And that number is repeated again in the third decade. So it's more than halved. And when you think we've got a top 6, 7 teams is only 7 different teams making the top 4 in 20 years. It's huge. Actually, though, this decade, we're 3 years in, or perhaps before, you've seen it's going to be 8. And if Forest make the top 4, it's going to be 9. So we've seen a bit of resurgence there. So that doesn't suit my narrative, in terms of like this monopolisation. We're seeing a bit of a resurgence from the middle classes here. But this is my point. And the monopolies respond. You do get glitches. You can spend the money. It don't work. Look at Spurs. Look at Man United. To an extent, look at Arsenal. But they don't go for long. So this Forest team, it'll get torn apart. Mergers and acquisitions. They just buy you. It's acquisitions at the minute. It's not mergers yet. It will get to mergers. That's how you dominate and control.
Although this Marinakis owner looks a bit of a nutcase, don't he? So maybe he'll just keep spending and spending. I mean, I've never known anyone spend 35 players in one window, but yeah.
Yeah, the problem is, though, they are bound by the financial sustainability rules or the FFP, whatever. They're all so complex and weird, but it's stopping teams spending. This is the Premier League ceding advantage to those big clubs again. This is UEFA ceding advantage, cozying up to them. They need the clubs because the clubs can fuck them off and go together with a new business. That's the threat. They threaten the power base. So in my opinion, if you're looking at this properly, City are on these charges, 115 charges. They're going to get away with it. The reason they're going to get away with it is because the Premier League work for City, if that makes sense. They are working with them, not against them. Yeah, it's a bit embarrassing, this whole saga, but what do they care? No one's threatening their power base. No, they don't care. The Premier League are self-elected, self-regulated. Who put them in charge, by the way? And we're going to talk about the digital broadcasting model in a bit and what the Premier League are going to do. But they just wear suits and do nothing. The Premier League, they wear suits and do nothing. And we've got to take these people on. So yeah, you watch, they'll get away with it, City, because it's a bit like a murder charge, really, isn't it? There's that many. You're either guilty or you're not guilty, and they'll find them not guilty. They'll find a way. I agree. They've cheated on an industrial scale, and they'll get away with it because they've sponsored themselves. Newcastle are allowed to do that because these rules have come in now to stop this happening, and to basically freeze the pyramid in time and keep the big clubs, on top. Because if you can spend more, you'll win more. And every now and again, a Forest might come through, but they'll just asset strip them. If you want to understand what's going to happen to Forest, look at Leicester and look at Wolves. That's what will happen to Forest. The players and the managers that achieve greatness, even the coaching staff or the scouting networks that achieve greatness, go up. You can't keep them. And football's not really that competitive anymore.
There's only really Brighton, I suppose, that have kept with their
They have defied the odds
model
constantly.
Mad, isn't it?
Yeah. And if you look at this, I've used that kind of metaphor of the stock market. It is a bit like gambling on the stock market. You buy bonds at a low price and then you sell them at a high price. And that's what players are. They're like assets, the bonds. So you're gambling on the future. But, Real Madrid didn't sign Mbappe for what he's done. They signed him for what he's going to do. And sometimes you get lucky with players, and you sign a player and he just achieves great things, and you can sell him for an inflated price. Sometimes you gamble on that player at the peak of his career, but it doesn't work out. They're not robots; they're human beings. Sometimes it doesn't work out, but over time you just keep spending more, and eventually everyone else is frozen out, and it's just barriers to entry there. You just can't get in, and they control scarce resources. The asset price inflation, we see it in the wider economy. And now with the oil money really pumping money into football, these players are worth, the value of the players has gone up because asset price inflation. I've just said it, but we see it. It's the same thing. So smaller teams can't afford these players. One thing that Forest did that was a great signing was the acquisition of for 42 million, wasn't it, for Gibbs White? As an 18-year-old, I think he was at the time, or maybe 19. But when he was coming through at Wolves, he looked special, and then he kind of disappeared for a bit. He must have got injured. He was a great gamble because a lot of eyebrows went up there at that price for that. But he's turned out to be a great buy, and he's a really special player. And I think that teams like Arsenal must be looking at him. Elanga as well, and Hudson-Odoi. Kind of cast-offs from the monopolies. They back the run all the Alanga's pace. They should have kept him, but they didn't, and they gambled with
even Chris Wood. To be fair, I know he's older, but he's come in and done a brilliant job, Woody.
He's been amazing. He's been amazing. I think they'll keep him because I think he's too old.
Yeah, I agree.
31. You're not going to pay a 4-year contract for him. But you know what? 35-year-old Chris Wood will probably still be knocking him in because he's big and strong. His game's not pace. But so that's where we are, mate. And nobody's looking at this and going, our clubs are going to get taken off. If we don't do anything, it could be 10 years, it could be 20 years. You never know. It could be 5 years. But if we don't do anything, the Premier League is going to lose its status as the best league in the world.
There's a couple of questions that guys will have, so make sure you put your questions in for Micky, and I'm happy to answer some of them if we can. I'm sure Micky is as well. But when people listen to this, they might think, well, there's nothing we can do about it. Like, you can't get your owners out. You can't kick your owners out. And when you read the book and when you listen, or if you've Audible, or whatever you want to do, I was quite surprised at how not easy it could be, but it wasn't actually a million miles away from being the truth, if that makes sense. So I don't know if you can try and sort of give a kind of brief into what people can do to get behind it, not just to listen and support what you're doing, but actually have a vision of, well, how does this work? What can we do? How do we get this away? And how do we kick the owners out, so to speak?
Yeah, there's a way of doing it. And you've got to think big and you've got to be ambitious. And do you know what? In Britain right now, we don't have that. There's a real sense of British decline. And maybe we know about it. Obviously, we've lost our empire, so we've just lost our football clubs. It's just another step in this decline, this process. We've got to switch. We've got to switch that mentality and actually go on the front foot and go, do you know what? Britain's got a great culture. And the ideas that I've got, there's a second book coming. It's all based around digital broadcasting, digital tech infrastructure. I'm going off on tangents here. I'll come back to how we do it, but it's such a big gear shift that people are a bit like blown away by the concept because it's just such a radical shift in the way that we think. But initially, I'm going to come to that, address your point about what we can do. We've got to come together as fans and look across the fan bases and begin to realise that we're all part of the same thing here. We all support the same team, really. These rivalries, these fierce rivalries, there's something underneath that. And actually, we're losing these rivalries. We are losing our rivalries, and you can see it. You go into the stadiums and you won't even hear it. That's the point, isn't it? I've not been to Arsenal for a long, long time, but I've been to Spurs, and you needed a space helmet. And I was just surrounded by tourists. I was in the East Stand. My mate's got a corporate thing and going on.
Corporate now, yeah.
Yeah, my mate's he works in the city, and he gets corporate footy clubs for clients and more, so I can get away with the odd little corporate job with him. It was £300 a ticket. Speaking to this guy, and I was watching Leeds. I was winning Leeds. It was a couple of seasons ago, and got to speak to this guy. He couldn't get a season ticket at Spurs because they limit them, don't they? They don't want real Spurs fans in there. And he's on the waiting list, but he said it's never going to happen. So we had to get a season ticket in the East Stand. The whole thing's corporate. And it cost him $4,000. But he had to also pay for his son, of course. He wants to take his son to watch his local team. But he had to pay for 3 seasons up front. It cost him $24,000 to watch Spurs. I mean, he sold software to banks. He can afford it. He's doing all right for himself. Nice guy as well. But who can afford that? You know, This is where we are now. I was speaking to Ian Stone. You might know Ian. He's a Google. Great comic.
Yeah,
great. I don't know if he said it. I think his ticket's over. It's over $1,000. I mean,
mine's similar. Yeah, I sit block 5 in the Emirates, and we're quite lucky because where we are, we're quite a noisy bunch, really. But the rest of the stadium is silent. It's sat down, and I remember the stewards probably about 10 years ago all trying to get us all to sit down. What are we doing here? Like, this is crazy. Like, what? Yeah. This isn't a cinema. You know what I mean? Like, what's going on here? Like, it was
I mean, do you know what? As well, I will address what we can do as fans, but it's like VAR and stuff like that. We don't have any choice over. There's no democracy. The Premier League don't work for us. They don't listen to us. And the idea that I'm saying around, don't communicate with your club and don't communicate with the Premier League. Let's take them. We can take these people on and we can win. We can, $25,000, $24,000. And so I replied to a comment, $24,000 he had to fork out up front to watch his local team. This is where we are. I mean, it's happening in Leeds as well. The sanitised atmosphere is coming in the Premier League. You see it. It's better in the Championship. You get your club back. And you go to the Premier League and it's all corporate. We're raising season ticket prices again. Everyone is. These Premier League price hikes, they've been timed really well for the book. The book's been out 3 months and it's come at a good time because there comes a tipping point, I think, where fans can see it, that this really isn't working for us. And I think we've always probably known that, but they are literally freezing us out of our own culture, our own backyard. The rest of the world, they own English football now in our own backyard. And if we think differently, go on the front foot and unite as fandom, because the network to do it is already there. All these podcast networks, the way that you've got a great relationships down with loads of podcasters, and you all speak so highly of each other. You know, there's a community growing here that is beyond just individual clubs. The clubs are starting to come together. Fan bases are starting to realise that we've got to work together on this now. And there is already the network. What you've got to do is politicise the network. What you've got to do is make that radical shift in perspective. It's in our hands. And that's why I think the book is powerful, because it's thinking outside the bubble of this neoliberal concept. It's the only book that is. And it puts us on the front foot. Yeah, I've dreamt big. Yeah, it's ambitious. But why not be ambitious? And we've got to do something radical here. The Premier League do not work for us. They are working for the oil companies and for the Americans. And they're going to facilitate this switch away from, our heritage, our culture, away from us and towards globalization and the global markets. If we want to intervene, we've got to act now, because we've got a golden opportunity. I'm going to come back to that digital tech infrastructure, Dan. And have you got to the bit in the book where it explains the digital tech?
No, I'm just towards halfway through it at the moment.
Right, you're about to get
That's
there.
What I need to do is order the rest in Audible, I think.
It's a lot better. It's a lot easier. With the digital broadcasting, this is how it's going to work. You do it from a single source. 188 countries, 200 million people already paid to watch Premier League football. They pay upwards of £38 a month. If you charge 200 million people £10 a month, it's 24 billion. So this is what a single source digital streaming could be bringing in. Premier League wages are about 4 billion. It costs between 500 and a billion to run a year. So the operational costs are pretty low compared to how much the profits. Imagine if we owned that company. Imagine if that company was owned or worked for Britain, not just the Premier League, whoever the hell they are. Whoever put them in charge, a small group of people.
You compare that to what our ANPR costs or track and trace costs and all that. You think actually it's not as bad as you think, because those things are a crazy amount of money as well. But in comparison to what the Premier League would cost.
This is our market, mate. And do you know what? When Arsenal are paying Spurs, the big games, it goes up to between 500 and 600 million. That's our brand, mate. That's our market. You charge them £10 a month, and they pay. You're talking astronomical numbers of money here. We could be bringing in 50, 60 billion a year in broadcasting if we got the brand right and we got the model right and we sold this amazing thing we've got to the rest of the world. And actually, us being separated from our game, it's diminishing the products, because that's not the atmosphere that is associated with English football, is it? The atmosphere of these corporate events now is what you're watching at Arsenal, what you're watching at Spurs or whoever, or what you're watching at Man United. It's a corporate event. We may as well have the cheerleaders on at half time. I mean, Murdoch introduced that initially, but that the Americanization of our sport, we've got the wrong side of Americanization.
Soon at half time, you'll have Beyonce and Jay-Z coming on soon. We ain't far away from it.
Talking about Coldplay at half time at something else. I remember like these events. It's just, it's not what we originally signed up for, is it? But
no, 100%, man. What would you say to the fans that are coming out with this?
It's not. It's all the same. Someone said here, AMD. He says it's too late. Unfortunately, it's all about the money now. 'Tis the American way. You're right about that, but you're not right about one thing. It's not too late, pal. We can take these, and we've got to take it now, because when this Super League structure happens, it happens incrementally. You look at the Champions League. It's a league, Dan. This is the first year they've introduced that league. It happens slowly. We're well on the way to this now. When this does happen, we can't really pull our clubs out. It's going to be so hard, because when this superstructure happens, all eyes are on that. All commercial revenue goes towards that, and the Premier League loses status. But right now, it's the biggest league in the world. We can take these on, and we can actually do it better than they do. The commercial agenda. But this is how you do it, and you've got to. I mean, I'm thinking towards 2029. You've got to put pressure on that election, because if we can grow this movement, and this is gonna. You've got to listen carefully to what I'm saying here, because I'm going to tell we're going to nationalise football, but the state will not own it. And it's important to make that differentiation between nationalisation, kind of like communist, or the state owns it. There's a way of doing it where we use the state as a lever to own it ourselves. And we're going to run football as a huge corporation that we own together as a collective, as 5-10 million people. A model like this already exists in North Spain, in the Basque region, called Mondragon. It got a big company across different sectors, and it's owned by the workers and this is how we've got to look at football, because at the minute what you've actually got is communism. You've got central authority, no democracy. Decisions being made by faraway entities. It's not how you should run football. It's not logical. It's not rational. Saudi Arabia own Newcastle. Just stupid saying it. But there's a way of doing this differently. You can kick out the owners and get this. It's a Brexit benefit. So inside the EU, we won't be able to nationalise football clubs, because they could appeal to the European courts, and they've got the anti-liberalisation laws there. So it's a really difficult thing to get done inside Europe. Outside Europe, which we are, we only have to adhere to the European Court of Human Rights, because that's an international treaty, not a European one. And that says this: you can nationalise businesses or property, and you can do it if you do it legally. Acts of Parliament. We have to go for Acts of Parliament here, mate. You've got to think big.
Yeah.
Acts of Parliament. You have to do an Act of Parliament, which is easily done. They're not that difficult to do. Act of Parliament. You've got to compensate them, and you've got to do it in the public interest. That if you meet those three criteria, you can do it. And we are going to do this in the public interest. You can buy every single football club in England for less than track and trace. It's not that expensive. And this is where you start looking at it economically and politically and going, football's a tiny, tiny economic footprint. It's not a big sector. If you want to nationalise energy, honestly, it's somewhere in the region of $500 billion. It's a lot of money. You want to nationalise football, top end 30 billion. And we talked about that broadcasting model, bringing in, somewhere conservative estimates, somewhere between 20 and 30 billion. Well, we could pay government back inside an election cycle.
There you go.
The taxpayer won't even pay anything. This is how you can do it. You could front the money with bonds on future broadcasting, revenue. So you can create the money that way and buy, so that you could stump up 30 billion from the broadcasting revenue, the future gains. So it wouldn't even cost the taxpayer anything. And then we can start looking at running football as a public service without any funding from the taxpayer. This is a really clever idea. What about a gambling company as well? Why don't we have a public gambling company? We already do. It's called the National Lottery. We all own that. We kind of do it. It works. It's about ownership. It's not we need to own the company, but as long as the companies work for us or in our interests, we can get a load of money here and we can put it out through our football clubs. And we've got 5 banks in this country that really monopolise the banking sector. Why not sell football clubs as banks that give out loans to small and medium-sized businesses and individuals? Because if you've got a good idea as a person, an entrepreneur, you go to a bank, they won't lend you the money. They lend money to people to buy houses because they can take your house off you if it goes wrong. And they lend money to corporations, but they don't lend money to small, medium-sized business. We've got a huge problem with that. So why can't our football clubs do that? This extra money could go out there, or you could reinvest it into skills and training, into the care. We've got a big care industry in big trouble, elderly care. We've got the baby boomers coming down the pipeline, 66 to 46 they were born. Contraceptive pill in 1966 rolled out. That's the end of the baby boomers. They're going into care. Why don't we train British people in care, bolster that sector? That's how you stop. That's how you limit immigration, mate. That's how you do it sensibly. We've got to start thinking differently about politics and differently about economics. You've got, a party like Reform doing really well at the minute. And that very name, Reform, that's what we need. We do need reform, but we need the right reform. And as you read the book, it kind of makes this believable, because it is believable, it is possible. You can ring fence football and you can target it and you can get 3, 4, 5 million people together and go, you're doing this and you're buying football, you're handing it over to us. And this is about growth. It's about, we can do this totally differently. We can sell directly to the customer base without the need for any billionaires. What about giving away 10% ownership rights to clubs, to foreigners, sorry. Imagine paying £1 a month to own Arsenal, having email correspondence with them, having a little own area of the ground, getting to vote on certain decisions at Arsenal. You've got hundreds of millions of fans, mate, worldwide. Mm-hmm. If you've got 100 million people to pay £1 a month, it's £1.2 billion a year going into Arsenal. Man United have got supposedly 500, 600 million fans. If 500 million pay £1 a month, 6 billion going into Man United. So, there's a different way of doing this. What about shirt manufacturing? Do we need Nike and Adidas to sell shirts? Are you buying Arsenal because it's with Nike or Adidas? No. Are you buying Man United because it's Adidas? No, you're buying a Man United shirt because you want to be a Man United fan. You want that club badge. Why don't we take over shirt manufacturing? Do a lot of it abroad because it's cheaper, but do some of it here as well because we've got a trade deficit, and we don't export very much. We don't manufacture anything. And, someone's put on, is it Hendon Gooner?
Hendon Gooner.
There's no democracy in football. You're exactly right. We are living through an authoritarian dictatorship. It sounds really like, whoa, to say that. The Premier League are authoritarian. When do you ever get asked about anything, Dan? When do we ever get consulted? Look at VAR. Do we want VAR? We were never asked. I know about Lee, Lee Judge's legend. Lee can't stand it. Everyone I speak to can't stand it. But have we ever been consulted? Do we ever get asked? We get asked about nothing. There is no democracy. Why don't we democratise football? Do you know what? You don't want too much democracy because you never get anything done. I did a presentation at Clapham last week. So, baby, if you're listening to this and you want me to come down and do a presentation, I've got a PowerPoint slide ready, mate. I will come to you, and I'm really passionate about this, and we need to get the message out there. The minute I'm just doing it through the podcast, speaking directly to fans through this great network you've got going on, Dan. But you don't want too much democracy. I'll go back to Clapham because nothing gets done. They all roll their eyes when it's like you make a decision. But what you want is clubs, good business decisions being made. But every now and again, they turn around to fans and go, are we doing a good job? And the fans can turn around and say, yay or nay, or we want you to do this. As long as the clubs work for the fans, as long as the Premier League works for the country, I think we're winning. At the minute, it's the other way around. They don't work for the clubs at all. They don't work for the fans at all, sorry. And the Premier League don't work for the country. They work for themselves. They work for the oil industry, and they work for the Americans. And this, what's interesting, Dan? We've got no digital software in this country. We don't have any. It's all American servers. So why don't we build our own digital tech infrastructure? A British Patriots should be fucking backing this, man. Let's build our own tech, and we can straight away. We've got billions to earn in the broadcasting. You know what I mean? And there's so much we could do with this. Why not go on the front foot and sell not just football, but comedy and music through the clubs? Like how many, I don't know. Have you got any Gooners fans, mate? Who's Gooners fans in the music industry?
We've got loads. We've got loads in music, within sport, with other sports.
Exactly. Comics like Ian Stone, I mentioned earlier, big Gooner. Ian could be releasing this comedy special through the Gooners channel that will be, going out to the rest of the world. That's how we should do this. And I suppose what I'm trying to say is we could set a digital tech infrastructure up and go, this is our Hollywood. It's our version of Hollywood here. Music, comedy, footy, and getting hammered. 4 aspects of British culture that I think we do best. And I'm proud of that. I think we do it better than we can sell that directly to the rest of the world. We've just got to think differently about the ownership structures and about the people that run our game. And I want to put out they're useless. We've got to take them on. And we've got to start thinking across the fan groups. This is not going to happen tomorrow. This is not going to happen next year. But what about in 2 or 3 years? Where are we going to be? Or what are you going to have done? Let's get together and let's start talking about a movement, a website, what we're going to call ourselves. Because all this needs sorting out. At the minute, I'm just floating the idea. I'm not even asking you to stand up and start a revolution. I'm just asking you to think about it.
100%, man. And look, people are. We got James in the chat. Who's this guy? What's this book? I'm mobilized. Well, I've pinned it into the comment section for you people, and there will be a link in the description to go and get it on either Audible or, of course, buy it from Amazon.
Cheers, James.
So big up to James. And it's not the only one as well, Mick. There's quite a few people. A couple of people have said, I've just bought this book. Sounds amazing. So that's what it's doing now. It's getting a message out there, and that's a start.
Yeah. Do you know what, mate? We might not agree on everything, but I think that, and that's natural, it's normal, it's okay. But I think there is a kind of general consensus of like, listen, we've been frozen out, we've got to do something. And that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying I've got all the answers, but what I'm saying is I've got solutions. We just go and improve it. Let's get this model. Let's work this out. What we really should be doing is writing a constitution, a football constitution. How should the game be governed? Because when you've got a huge corporation that's running football with millions of people involved, you need to get simple rules, mate. Simple. And this is really key. And this is what football does wrong. Football is rules-based at the minute, right? You've got to make it ethical. The rules have got to be ethics-based. And the moral landscape's got to be there. And then we've got to make that happen. What do you want is a powerful question. And that's what I'm asking football fans. We are worth something. And if we all stand together, we actually win, Dan.
Yeah, we do. And one of the hardest things to do is to unite the fan base. But one thing I will say is actually uniting them against what this might look like. If you've got something that be like, let's just, for example, say, do you want Kroenke out? Come and stand with me. You'll get some that are like, what's the point? What's the point? If they can actually see there's a reason and there's actually a genuine kind of light at the end of the tunnel, that's the message we've got to get across to these people now, is that actually if you do want to come and just stand over here and think, go on then, tell me what I've got to do, then actually there's a way forward. And that's what I think we've got to let people know, because so many people have gone to protests before, but they get deflated because it's like, what next? If we can actually see a target and something to aim for, I think you'll get a lot of people on side.
Do you know what, Dan? Spent 3 years writing this book, got the publishing deal, loads of work, loads of editors. It's become something I could never have done on my own, and I worked really hard. And do you know what, mate? Though I went and stood with 1958. So the 1958 are a Man United supporters group. I'm a Leeds fan. I went and stood with them. It's back to get a Glazers out protest. Met in the pub, and I know where I've got to know the movers and shakers of the movement, And they invited me to the pub at 12 o'clock, and some of people's faces like, you're a fucking Leeds fan. Do you know what I mean? It's like, but then they took me in, mate. It was really, I felt safe, felt like one of them. And then we stood under there with the flares going, cameras in our faces, marching towards Old Trafford, Glazers out. I stood right underneath the banner, and all these lads slapping on the back saying, go on, Leeds, lads. You know what I mean? And I was like, it got really emotional because it felt like, just talked about the book, that felt so much more important. It felt like the most important thing I'd done was go and stand, boots on the ground, Go and stand with other fan bases. And I think if we can build something where we go, this protest, Glazers out, Kroenke out, Levy out, it's all the same war. If we start standing with each other and this movement grows, you get momentum. And I think that when the ball starts rolling, I think people will want to get involved. The hardest part now is getting the ball rolling. It's getting 100%. That we need the early radicals to stand up and go, do you know what? I've said to myself, let's do this. 4 years, man. Just go for it. 4 years. Whatever happens, if people don't listen, I'm going to keep talking, keep going, and let's see where we are. Just keep pushing.
It's resilience of you is unbelievable, man. And look, before we do wrap up, because I've got another show at 1 o'clock, I just want to kind of finally say, what is next for you, and how can people come and listen to you more, and what have you got coming up? Just a bit of a plug at the end for yourself, man, and how people can listen to you more.
Well, thanks, mate. I appreciate that. At the moment, we've got. I did have a presentation I was going to do with the volley on Friday, but it's not happening. So unfortunately, I'm still at this stage now where I'm trying to get the London clubs together, support them across the clubs. I'm looking at season end, because I think when the season's going, there's too much. Football's all short-termism, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what I'm saying is, let's keep that short-termism, and also let's look long-term too. So I'm hoping to get a group of radicals, and I say radicals, people who just want to fight back across the Spurs, the Gooners, the Hammers, any club from London, anywhere in the south, really, into a room, do a presentation, and say, let's stick together. Let's start talking about what we need to get a website, a movement. At the minute, it's really in the embryonic stage. But if you want to get in touch with me, you can see my name there. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Insta, and let's grow this, because I have got people coming. There's a few of us in touch now, and they've turned around and said, "Listen, I get it. Let's build this. How do we build this? How do we get the message out there?" At the minute, mate, I'm just going on the podcasts, and I'm going to keep doing that and growing this, because you've got a great little network here, and I can reach hundreds of thousands of people doing this. And the idea is, we're going to fight back, and we're going to get together. At the minute, just get in touch, man. Send me an email, whatever. Send me a message, because the more people that do, this is about people, Dan. It's about togetherness. When I went and stood with Man United, it felt important, because it's about us. It's about community. It's about togetherness. And we are the people of the people's game. And that's what football used to be called. But you don't hear that anymore. And this is about us making a stand. So I don't know how we're going to do this yet, but I know that we're going to do it, if that makes any sense.
No, I love it. And I love the confidence and the optimism. And listen, people, if you do want to reach out to Micky, then either come through myself or just follow him on socials and reach out there. He's great at what he's doing, and he's really welcoming. He's been really supportive of what we do as a podcast here at 12th Man. And all the other guys as well. I've seen Micky on Sava's channel. I've seen him getting in touch with judges. He's been in touch with West Ham, Chelsea, Spurs, and all of them. So, we cover all clubs here. We've got a lot of supporters in the chat that are behind what you're doing, Mick. And you've got my full support, mate. So I really appreciate you coming on, man. I really do.
You're a legend, Dan. You're a legend.
Thanks a lot, man. No, you're
a legend. Great show, mate.
Yeah, listen, man, take it easy. Listen, people, make sure you do me a favor, hit the like button, hit subscribe. This is going to redirect you over to Deluded Gooner, which is where I'm going to be literally in a minute's time. So I'll see you all over there. Take it easy, and we're out of here. Laters, people.